So my name is Laura Volgger and I'm a doctoral candidate in political science and a research associate at the Center for Interdisciplinary Gender Studies at University of Innsbruck. When I think about what feminist resistance within the university looks like today, I need to take a step back and begin with the question of what my research is about. In a qualitative social science study that I have been part of since 2023 at University of Innsbruck, as well as in my dissertation, I deal with a topic that was also discussed intensively during FU's International Staff Week at Margarita von Brentano Center, which is sexualized violence in closed social settings and regimes of silence. From the perspective of feminist political research on violence, I ask how experiences of violence are politically regulated and become or fail to become recognized as knowledge. And I'm especially interested in regimes of silence, in the structures and practices that interrupt this translation and make experiences of violence politically ineffective. My argument today is that feminist research on sexualized violence is not only research about violence, but it is also a practice that intervenes in these regimes of silence and hostile environments. So when we speak about sexualized violence, we can draw on several decades of feminist research on violence, which has made very clear that sexualized violence is a continuum and is structurally connected to capitalism, cis-heteropatriarchy. The violence scholar Rebecca Hall once wrote about gender-based violence that violence is not only met with power, but violence finds power, precisely in these structures of domination that persist so stubbornly. It is therefore these everyday forms of violence and their normalizations that need to be examined. And this is where regimes of silence become highly relevant. In many cases of sexualized violence, our study showed it is not true that nobody in the surrounding environment knows about the violence. Rather, there are many people around the person affected who notice the violence but do not intervene, who are bystanders, who downplay experiences of violence, who trivialize them, who look away, deny them, or signal, oh, probably it wasn't that bad. Often people do not want to recognize violence as violence, they do not want to acknowledge it, they do not want to connect acts of violence with certain people. And these structural dynamics form the core of what can be understood as regimes of silence, as structures that maintain and stabilize this everydayness of sexualized violence and block the circulation of knowledge about it. Many interview people expressed this normality when they said, "Nobody believed me back then," as Sylvia H. pronounced it, or as Peter T. expressed it, because back then, who would have believed me as a child? Even if your experience was absolutely true, people said, he's just imagining it. These regimes of silence do not only operate within families, communities, or institutions around survivors, but they also shape the conditions under which feminist knowledge about violence can be produced, transmitted, and heard. And this fragile chain from embodied experiences of violence to publicly recognized and potentially politically effective knowledge is becoming more difficult to sustain for several reasons. As we already heard, first, the institutional and political conditions of feminist knowledge production are increasingly under attack. Feminist, queer, trans, and gender studies are increasingly exposed to authoritarian, anti-feminist, and anti-gender attacks. These attacks concern really concrete questions like which programs are funded, which courses remain in place, which structures may be named. Second, what is also at stake is not only the production of new, but also the preservation and transmission of already existing feminist knowledge about violence. These archives are fragile. They exist not only in books, in institutions, in legal reforms, but also in memories, in activist practices, in feminist classrooms, in conversations, bodies, stories that often have never been published. And this is why feminist research on violence today must also ask under what material conditions can knowledge about violence be produced at all, because it requires really specific resources, time for careful interview situations, for dealing with highly sensitive situations, and above all, for listening. It requires emotional and effective labor in relation to interviewees, as well as stabilizing work within research teams that engage with highly distressing material. And it requires time for the knowledge produced to circulate beyond academia. This form of research comes with specific responsibilities towards interviewees, but also team members, colleagues, and ourselves as researchers. And these responsibilities often stand in tension with the neoliberal and individualizing imperatives that structure universities. The demand to be productive, efficient, mobile, resilient, and constantly output-oriented. It means that feminist knowledge about violence becomes more difficult to produce under certain socio-political and economic conditions. But many of us would probably not be here if there were not also a but, if alongside violent structures and continuities, there were not always also continuities of solidarity and resistance that create some sort of cracks in this everydayness of violence. And here I would like to turn to one last point that has become increasingly clear to me over the course of the research practice, which is the situated political potential of feminist research. Conducting feminist research on violence also means speaking and writing about violence, and therefore struggling against these regimes of silence. It means creating space for these experiences. And this is where I locate feminist resistance in the academia, by speaking and writing about violence, by making violent structures visible and open to discussion. Feminist research can, at its best, help make privatized experiences socially legible. It can contribute to creating listening publics. And in this sense, feminist resistance in academia might also be understood as part of what many people in our study described as necessary, namely a broader revolution of listening and of not looking away. Not a revolution in a heroic sense, but one that is made by many in our everyday, in our lived everyday, in classrooms, in qualitative interview situations, in research teams, in small interactions. One man who participated in our study, for example, told us that for 75 years he had never spoken about the sexualized violence he experienced as a child. Only when this space opened up, when he found a flyer inviting people to participate in this study, did he see a chance to share his experiences. And for me, these are moments in which feminist research can really make a difference. I would like to close with a quote from one of my interviewees, Veronica M. Many months after I had conducted the interview with her, she sent a message saying, quote, "Reaching the point where I become aware of my experiences of violence gives me the feeling of being part of a world that is changing and in which I act. At the same time, it shows me how much better I'm doing," unquote. And for these moments, I think it's worth sustaining feminist resistances within academia. Thank you.